What's up, guys? It's three-time NFL Pro Bowler, all-decade return specialist, Josh Cribbs. I want to welcome you to the College Sports Connection podcast, where Double A, Alex, and AJ host the Mid-American Conference best.
All right, everybody, welcome back to the College Sports Connection podcast. I'm your host, Alex the Captain. Joining me, as always, it's AJ the Guru.
What's going on, everybody?
AJ, welcome back. We are already moving to week 3 of the college football season. Week 1, I traveled down to Kentucky and to Tennessee, watched some action down there, had a great time. Last week, you and I split duties. I was at Toledo versus UMass. You were at the first MAC game of the season, Ball State versus Western Michigan. Great weekend last weekend for us. I think we both had a great time. Not such a great weekend for the conference as a whole. 2 of the squads losing to FCS programs. Bowling Green obviously losing to Eastern Kentucky, and Buffalo losing to Holy Cross. Rough weekend for the MAC.
Yeah, a little bit. You know, you look at the first 2 weeks, really. That first week is always going to be tough because there's always going to be Power 5 non-conference schedules. So you're always going to have that. So your expectations aren't going to be stupid crazy, but you might have an upset here and there. But yeah, you go back to this week 2 here. I mean, you know, Ohio traveled to Penn State, lost that one 46-10. One of the bigger surprises was Central Michigan dropping one 38-24 to South Alabama, which was a really surprise. Akron dropped one to Michigan State at Sparty 52-0. Eastern Kentucky and BG, it was a 7 overtime game. We'll talk about that here in a little bit, but Eastern Kentucky pulled that off 59-57. You mentioned Holy Cross and Buffalo. Holy Cross pulled that one off 37-31 on a last-second Hail Mary, which we'll get into that a little bit too. That was interesting to watch. They had Miami of Ohio beat Robert Morris 31-14. You know, Kent State going out to Norman. Not really going to Norman, but traveling from Seattle to Norman and staying all last week out there practicing in high school, which we can talk about also. But yeah, Oklahoma beat them 33-3. You were at the Toledo UMass game. Toledo won that pretty handily, 55-10. Another interesting one too was Tulsa and Northern Illinois. Northern Illinois struggled for most of that game up until the last few minutes. Tulsa won that one 38-35. Then another kind of a surprise one too, which we were both really high on, along with a group of 5 guys on Eastern Michigan. They dropped one to Louisiana, the Raging Cajuns, 49-21. So we'll get into a little bit of these games. But first, we can get into the games that we attended and we saw live. I could talk about Ball State Western here real quick.
Yeah, go for it.
A lot of fun. My first time down to Muncie this season, and it was great to see a conference game. See the conference play start off. You know, Coach New, Coach Lester, friends of the program. So it was great to see those guys and talk to them a little bit. But Western, it was interesting. You know, I talked to Coach Lester post game for a little while, and you know, about his quarterback, Jack Slopak, and you know, this is only his second start. He took some shots. You know, he took a hard shot the sidelines, was out for a few plays, and Coach Lester talked about it. And that was my question to him, was just talking about the toughness. And you know, he goes, he's a tough kid, and he just kind of got more confident as the game went on. And you know, they were able to milk the clock towards the last 4 minutes of the game or so. Western broke off a 75-yard run. Ladarius Jefferson, he broke off a 75-yard run on one play. They kind of sealed the game for Western. They hadn't led the game up until that point. But Carson Steele ran very well. You know, Paddock looked really comfortable in the pocket. You know, it's going to take time for him to grow and develop in the pocket. Yeah. And you know, as we get deeper into the season, you know, Ball State hosts Murray State this weekend, the Racers. So you know, he'll just get more and more confident. But yeah, you kind of look at it here. Paddock was 23 of 40 for 291. You know, Carson Steele ran hard. He ran with some power, with some aggression. You can see some of the highlights on social media as well. You know, he had 26 carries for 147 yards and 1 touchdown. There was one run where it was probably a 30-yard run where he was brought down, but he didn't touch the turf. And he rolled over a defender, got back onto his feet, and ran to another 8, 10, 12 yards, whatever it may have been. And, you know, Coach Lester talked about that too in his press conference. You know, he was a tough guy to bring down. And you know, you kind of watch some of those highlights and you can definitely tell. But I think, you know, Amir Abdul-Rahman, transfer from Vanderbilt. He had a one-handed snag along the sidelines, which was the ESPN top 10 play. Definitely had to have been. I haven't watched it, but I'm sure it was. A one-handed snag along the back sideline. You know,
Well, and then he hit the gritty in the end zone.
he did. Yeah, he did.
Well, and
Jay-Sean
that
Jackson.
was one of our Tuesday top 3 this week.
Yeah.
That was the offensive play of the week.
No.
I'm gonna be honest, I only picked it because he hit the gritty. That was the only reason. The catch was great, but I mean, just adding the little dance there at the end was fantastic.
Right. Jay-Sean Jackson, he came and he played pretty well, had a couple of great back shoulder catches. Johannes Tyler was 5 receptions for 52 yards. The thing that really kind of hurt Ball State, I think, is, again, Coach Lester talked about it, was they wore Ball State's defense down towards the end. They were a little winded, a little gassed. And that's why Western was able to break off that 75-yard run to steal the game. And but nevertheless, a great crowd in Muncie. They had a flyover. The Ball State ROTC sponsored the game. So the A-10s out of Fort Wayne did a flyover pregame, which was really cool. Tailgate field was nice. Student section was packed for the first half, at least. And then, but yeah, the stands were great. The band was good. But yeah, it was just great to have football back in Muncie, and it was a good day. We had great weather. We got to sit in the press box and that air conditioning, but that turf was hot. And so I was down there pregame and postgame for a little while, and it was warm down there, to say the least. But nevertheless, it was a lot of fun. Got to see some action. We're going to see some more action this weekend, which we'll get into here later on. But let's talk about Toledo UMass.
Yeah, Toledo UMass. So I wrote my recap article on this, and I'm sure Jason Candle talked to Toledo about it all week. Limit penalties. Let's start fast, because week 1 they played Long Island University, and Toledo just looked, I don't want to say they looked bad, but they looked sluggish. They, shaking off a lot of the rust. A kind of a underwhelming 37-0 victory, which I laugh. It's always funny to say a 5-score victory with a shutout is underwhelming, but that's just how it felt that whole game, right? Whereas this game, Toledo came out, they punched UMass in the jaw quick, held them on their first drive to -2 yards, went down immediately, scored, did this 4 consecutive drives until finally UMass stopped the barrage. Toledo had to punt for the first time with like 5 minutes left in the first half. And then UMass was able to put some points on the board, a late first half touchdown. And then the second half, it was the same thing all over again. Toledo. They pulled DeQuan Finn in the fourth quarter because of how up Toledo was. And then Don Brown, who is now the head coach at UMass, got them in position to go kick a late field goal that obviously didn't affect the outcome. So it was a good 55-10 win. Obviously, UMass is not the peak of what you're looking for, right? UMass is not a high caliber opponent, but they are an FCF opponent or FBS opponent. They are a former MAC foe. And I think it was a good tune-up for Toledo heading into their game this week. We had some of those other games on that you mentioned. We had the Northern Illinois Tulsa game was on while we were watching the Toledo game in the press box. The Bowling Green Eastern Kentucky game was on, and you could kind of feel, because the press box is mostly Toledo people, so you kind of feel a little bit of the excitement building as they're watching that game, just hoping that Bowling Green was going to end up falling, which obviously you mentioned they did, 59-52 or 59-57 in 7 overtimes, which is just what a marathon to have that happen. We got to see the end of the Buffalo game as well, where they lost on the crazy Hail Mary. And it looked like that was Buffalo's game to really win at one point when they started to really apply the pressure. And then they let it slip away. I think Maurice Linguist has some questions he has to answer. Same with Scott Leffler at Bowling Green. Those guys I think Scott Leffler's seat is infinitely warmer than Maurice Linguist is. And we've seen it all over Twitter, how people are, saying #fire Scott. And I understand their frustration. That first year they came out under his regime, they beat Toledo by multiple scores. It was the first time they'd beaten Toledo in 8 years at that point. And now they're losing games to middle of the road FCS programs. They've got a couple of solid wins under their belt, but something's got to change down in Bowling Green. You mentioned Western Michigan, Ball State. I didn't get to catch any of that because I was doing stuff to prepare for the Toledo game, but that one looked like fun. Sparty all over Akron. DJ Irons got knocked out of that game. So that was pretty indicative of what was going to happen when the starting quarterback of your team is taken out. You're in for a rough time. But the game that I was most interested in, at least through halftime, Kent State, Oklahoma.
Mhm.
Kent State was down 7-3 at half.
Yeah.
Kent State looked really, really good defensively in that first half. And, offensively, they're still figuring stuff out, right? They don't have Dustin Crum anymore, who is now playing in the Canadian Football League. Congratulations to him. We saw that announcement earlier today. He just signed with one of the Canadian programs. But Colin Schlee doesn't look bad. This is a kid who has the impossible task of replacing one of the greatest passers in Kent State history. And I'm not disappointed with the kid. Obviously, to have such the impossible gauntlet in the non-conference schedule, to go to Washington, to go to Oklahoma. They're now at home this week against Long Island University, but then next week they're back on the road against the defending national champions who waxed Oregon in week 1, and they won big again this last week. So it's really hard to get a good measure of where a lot of these programs are, especially against the big powerful schools. When you're playing top 15 ranked opponents, is your defense good or are they playing bad? Is your offense good or are they playing bad? It's just so hard to say. But I think that once we hit week 3 here, where we start to see a little bit of a change of things, we've got a few good games happening this week. Cincinnati taking on Miami down at Paycor Stadium, the old Paul Brown Stadium in Cincinnati. Kent State playing host to Long Island University. That should be a win. Buffalo travels to Coastal Carolina. They almost upset Coastal Carolina at Buffalo last year. Don't know if I see that happening this year. Central gets a chance to rebound against Bucknell. Ohio traveling out to Iowa State and Matt Campbell, the former Toledo head coach. Murray State, as you said, coming to Ball State this week. Couple games that I have circled on my calendar for week 3. This one is the first of them. Vanderbilt at Northern Illinois. This is an interesting game to me.
Yeah, it really is. Right now the odds makers say Northern Illinois -2.5. And this is a game that really could set the tone for the rest of the year for Northern Illinois.
Yep.
The SEC foe coming to DeKalb, because next week Northern Illinois goes to Kentucky. So this is a game. I'm not saying Vanderbilt is the best of the SEC or middle of the SEC, but nevertheless, it's a great way to measure where you're at this point in the season. You're going to be solidified at quarterback with Rocky Lombardi. Defensively, James Esther, and that crew. They're going to be ready to go. And I think Coach Hammock is going to have these guys ready on Saturday at 3:30 kickoff. So yeah, I think that's going to be a really interesting one. I'm excited to watch that.
Yeah, that one's going to unfold really well. 3:30 kickoff, like you mentioned, over on the CBS Sports Network. Marshall at Bowling Green. We talked about this earlier. Marshall just pulled off a tremendous upset at Notre Dame this last week. If you're Bowling Green, you're hoping that they're celebrating the hangover, or that there's a celebratory hangover. That one is honestly a tough one. That kicks off at 5 on the NFL Network. Akron is traveling to Tennessee. We saw Ball State take on Tennessee earlier this year. Akron is now taking them on. Not much to write home on that one, I don't think. Akron comes away with the victory. Tennessee is now ranked 15 in the country, and they've earned every bit of that. They've looked really good the last 2 weeks. They beat, what was it? Not Florida. Who'd they beat this last week?
Pitt.
Yeah, Pitt. Yeah,
in overtime.
Yep, they beat Pitt. Obviously, they beat Ball State the previous week. Speaking of Pitt, this is another game that we have circled on our calendar. Western Michigan playing host to number 23 Pittsburgh. A year ago, Western Michigan kept Pitt out of the college football playoffs with their upset at now what is formerly known as Heinz Field. And if I'm Coach Lester, I'm pumped about this when you just came off a great win over a MAC foe. Now you get to go back to Waldo Stadium. You get those fans excited. You get people excited. That one's going to be a good one. Eastern Michigan travels out to Arizona State. Pac-12 after dark. That one kicks off at 11 o'clock on Saturday night. We will be done with our festivities ideally by then. But we have two games that we're hitting up. Cincinnati at Miami, hosted at Paycor Stadium, like I mentioned. That kicks off at noon on ESPNU. Then we're traveling up to Columbus for Toledo versus number 3 Ohio State. It's a night game on Fox. How pumped are you for Saturday?
That's gonna be a lot of fun. We got all the finally we have all the details ironed out. So it's gonna be a long day, but it's gonna be a lot of fun. Great opportunity to go to two phenomenal venues to watch two phenomenal games. You look at the rivalry between Miami of Ohio and Cincinnati. That's a rivalry game that it's not around all the time. It's not every year type of thing.
Right.
And so it'd be good for Miami of Ohio fans. And Oxford just traveling not too far from just north of Cincinnati, not that far.
About an hour, yep.
Yeah, and then the Bearcats, who they're kind of down this year, really. They're 1-1 right now. Haven't performed to the standard that we thought they would. They lost week 1 to Arkansas, but they beat Kennesaw State last week, 63-10. Right now, it's Cincinnati minus 22 going into the game. I want to circle back real quick to the Pitt Western Michigan game. As I mentioned, I talked to Coach Lester post game for a little while. And so we didn't talk much about this game because obviously he had questions about Ball State, but the excitement that he had in the locker room after that game, or even coming off the field, singing the fight song and singing the alma mater with the fans and running into the locker room, the excitement he had was off the charts. We've gotten to know him pretty well over the past couple of years, having him had it on the show a few times via Zoom and via media day and whatnot. He's a charismatic type of guy, but he was extremely pumped the post-game meetings and press conferences. So I think this week he's going to take that excitement, that momentum from Muncie, and they're going to play Pitt. They're going to play Pitt really tough. I think it's Pitt minus 10 right now, but nevertheless, that's going to be a really interesting game. Now to go back to this coming weekend, yeah, we're going to have fun. It's we get to be in two facilities that are sacred in their respective leagues. And so it's weird. It's always going to be Paul Brown Stadium. Like you Google Paul Brown Stadium and it's like it doesn't even really come up anymore. You have to just type Bagel Stadium or whatever, the Paycor Stadium. And so because the boxes that we've been in, and being in Detroit, it's 7th floor, but it doesn't seem that far from the field. These ones are going to be a lot further.
Yeah, with these outdoor venues, right? It's with the Paycor Stadium. We've all seen pictures of it. An Ohio State fan, but I'm very pumped to go be in this cathedral to college football, because that's what it is. I mean, the Big Ten, and really here in the Midwest, we're very fortunate that 3 of the 5 biggest stadiums in the country are within driving distance of us.
Yeah.
Penn State, Ohio State, and Michigan. You take a little bit more time, you drive down to Tennessee, they're in the top, I think, 8. So we're really, really lucky to have all these incredible stadiums so close to us. And I'm pumped to be there and to be in the box for that. Cincinnati, Miami, what a great rivalry. All-time series. They are knotted up right now, 59 apiece. 59, 59, and 7, I believe, is the overall record. The battle for the victory bell. And Cincinnati's won the last 15. It's been a pretty lopsided rivalry as of late. Miami almost had them back in 2019. I think it was a last-minute touchdown by Cincinnati to win that game. And this is going to be a good one. It's a noon kickoff, like I said. with Ohio State Toledo, the last time these two squads played, Toledo is 0-3 against Ohio State. Ohio State hasn't lost to an in-state opponent since 1921. They
Like
haven't
Ohio
tied,
Wesleyan or something like that.
yeah, like Ohio Wesleyan, and they last tied an in-state opponent in 1924. And up until, I want to say it was I saw this on their media stat chart that they sent out today. From like 58 to 1991 or 2, Ohio State didn't play an in-state opponent that entire period.
Right.
It was like 40 some years.
Yeah, it doesn't happen a whole lot. Occasionally they'll play OU.
Well, they've played in-state opponents 29 times since then.
Yeah.
Since they've started playing in-state opponents again.
Mhm.
So,
I mean, this is the 100th anniversary of the horseshoe.
yep.
And Ohio State football has been around 130 years, probably, give or take.
Yep.
So, yeah, that's really.
They've never lost to an in-state in the horseshoe.
No.
Talk about protecting the state.
Right. So, yeah, I mean, had a couple of years ago, you had OU travel there. The Bobcat got in a fight with Brutus. I remember
That's been
that.
so long now. I always forget about that.
Yeah. And then Toledo, they played Ohio State at Cleveland Brown Stadium
Mm-hmm.
a while back.
That would
Was
have
it the
been
last-
2009 when they played over at Cleveland.
Was that the last time they played each other?
The last time they played each other was 2011, and I knew you were going to bring this up, you giant asshole. Toledo lost 27-22 in Columbus
That's
in
right.
2011. Just have to rub it in, don't you, AJ? Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
I forgot about it for a second, but now that you bring it up.
But no, the last time these two programs met, Toledo was in the middle of a pretty good season. They finished 9-4 that year. Ohio State finished 6-7, losing in their bowl game. They lost to Michigan that year. It was a rough season. That was that transition year after Tressel. Luke Fickell was the interim head coach for Ohio State.
Yeah, that was Luke Fickell took over. We lost to like Florida in the Gator Bowl or something like that.
Lost to Florida in the Gator Bowl. I think you guys lost to Nebraska on the road. Like that was a Ohio State fans don't talk about that one for a good reason.
Yeah, we started off with two MAC teams that year. We played Akron week 1, won that 42-0. Then we beat Toledo 27-22. And then Colorado. Yeah, that was a rough one. Lost to Florida 24-17. Yeah.
That Ohio State versus Rufus, or the Brutus the Buckeye versus Rufus from Ohio. 2010 was that fight.
Wow.
How incredible is that?
12 years ago. Wow, that's impressive.
So, that just to think that that's been that long ago. But I think of the in-state opponents, I was looking up some other stuff. Bowling Green's played Ohio State the best. Bowling Green's had some really good games with Ohio State. Toledo historically, this is now their 4th time meeting. Toledo historically has done very poorly against Ohio State, save the 2011 season. So this will be interesting. Jason Candle was on the staff the last 2 times Toledo played Ohio State. The first time the first time he was there was in 2009 when they played at Paul Brown, and Ohio State I think they shut Toledo out. Toledo is really, really bad that year. And that was the year right after they beat Michigan up at the Big House. And so, yeah, Jason Candle was on the staff that year under Tim Beckman, who was the head coach. And then it was under, Tim Beckman again in 2011 when they almost beat him in Columbus. So, yeah.
I forgot Beckman was the coach of Toledo.
Yep. And then he went to Illinois, and now he's not coaching anymore.
Yeah, he hasn't coached since 2014. He was at BG from 98 to 04, then Ohio State, Oklahoma State, Toledo, and Illinois. So you got into trouble at Illinois, right?
Yes, there was some sort of, I'm not entirely sure of the situation, but yeah, he got in some hot water at Illinois. I don't know if it was inappropriate conduct. I don't know if it was player mismanagement, but there was some issues over there at Illinois.
So let's we talked about it a little bit ago. So we kind of covered this weekend, this coming weekend, and last week. Get some mailbag questions. Let's get into those.
Yeah, so we posted that we were going to be talking about some mailbag stuff. So here we are. I guess we'll bring up the first one. This is from Kenneth Bailey. If the Power Five further splits, how would that impact the income or the money games for the MAC? And he goes on to clarify, by the Power Five splitting, he was referring to the elite end of the Power Five splitting away from the not so elite. So you would get like your Purdue's would leave the Big Ten, things like that. And I think this is an interesting question. So I'm going to let you kind of field this one first.
I don't think it affected too much because you kind of look at the MACtion as a whole. It's a brand. They have that time slot on Tuesdays and Wednesdays in the fall. So I really don't think it's to be that much. That's if anything, it's not gonna hurt it. It's gonna help it because it'll bring some maybe some bigger names. I guess the only way that it'll hurt it, and this is just a possibility, I guess, is being not the only game on TV that night. That's
Right.
really the only way that I think they can hurt it. Outside of, but besides, the MAC has the Mid American Conference. I can talk today owns those Tuesdays and Wednesday nights.
Yeah.
And so I think we've seen the stats before too, like social media interactions and how the MAC is in the top 5, or top 7 at least in the country, and that's above. Sometimes it's above Power 5 programs, and so they have a great imprint on college football fans. Everybody loves a good MACtion game on a Tuesday or Wednesday in the late fall.
Yeah.
So I don't think it'll affect it at all by anything.
Yeah, I don't think it will either. I think that, well, and because I still think that they'll still play those money games, right? Even if the Purdue's of the world, the Northwesterns of the world split off from the Big Ten and do their own thing, they're still going to schedule teams that they need to quote unquote warm up against. And yeah, I don't think it's one of those things that we're going to see a hefty drop off on that. So I think you're right. I think that they're going to be fine. The MAC will continue to quote unquote make their money from those games, and those teams will continue to make their money from those games. So not something I am also too concerned about.
No.
Moving on, we have from Vanzi, or at the Vanzi. For years, the MAC and the Sun Belt have been considered the lowest group of 5 conferences, and the Sun Belt had a banner week beating ranked Power 5 opponents. The MAC was losing to 2 FCS schools. Talk about that. Well, I mean, I think it's it's a tough look right now. The MAC is historically a pretty solid group of 5 conference. This last weekend, I think we're starting to see that the parity within the conference is widening. That gap is widening, right? Obviously we're still going to have those Tuesday, Wednesday night games where we're going to see a high scoring affair that ends in the 60s for both teams. But we're starting to see teams like, unfortunately, Bowling Green, who shouldn't be going into overtime, let alone 7 overtimes, losing to Eastern Kentucky. And we're seeing teams like Toledo who are blowing out FCS or FBS opponents. So and then we got Northern Illinois who are losing close 3-point games and competing with good FBS group of 5 teams. So I think that we're starting to see the parity within the conference even more so. And I think it's it's not anything that the MAC is doing. It's more what the schools are doing in terms of what they're investing in. Are the schools investing in the football program? Are they investing in other things? And I think that that's where we're going to start to see things split out, and we're going to see less, like Akron. Akron's very much a basketball school. They're basketball and soccer. The world knows that. I mean, Akron soccer has won several good games this year already. They won a national championship about 12 years ago.
I think they're playing Ohio State tonight.
Yes, they are. So Akron is a soccer school, and that's fine. Bowling Green, they're a hockey school. If I'm the new athletic director, who I know that they've got an interim, but they are on a national search for a new athletic director, I look at seeing what we do with the football program, but then I look at allocating funds to really strengthen the hockey program. The hockey program is a big draw for Bowling Green. It's something even Toledo, their big rival, doesn't have. So I think that's a critical draw for Bowling Green. And I think MAC schools need to realize time to allocate resources towards what you're good at, and it's okay to not be good at football, but be really, really good at basketball, be really, really good at hockey, be really, really good at soccer. So I think moving those resources and allocating them appropriately, maybe that causes a shakeup and a shift in the MAC. Maybe you've got FCS level programs who are committed to being good football programs, want to make a move to the MAC, and that'd be okay. But I mean, who knows? It's a tough one.
It is. The MAC has struggled the first 2 weeks, but I mean, you can go back historically, and the MAC is, I'm not going to say they get blown out often or lose to Power 5 schools. I mean, you had a couple of years ago, Ohio beat Penn State at Penn State, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then you've had
2012, James
2012,
Franklin's
right.
first year, I believe.
And then you have, Western Michigan went to Pitt and beat a Heisman finalist last year.
And a Power 5 conference champion.
Yeah, conference champion. And they played it at Heinz Field then. And so you kind of look at it as a whole. And the MAC, they're in a good spot.
Mm-hmm.
Football wise, they have peaks and valleys. And that's why we've talked about it before. And that's being the Mid-American Conference is the most balanced conference in all of football, really. And so you kind of look at, I can't remember the exact number, but it's like 9 of the last 12 MAC champions have all been different schools or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And so, a couple of years ago, Akron was crushing it. Now they're kind of in a rebuild.
Yep.
When I was at Ball State back in the day, 2013, we were ranked nationally.
Mm-hmm.
Had a great year, had a great couple of years up and, now we're kind of rebuilding now. So it's a big cycle. And so it happens every year, but there's always going to be the 1 or 2 schools who stay pretty consistent. And that's Northern Illinois right now. And maybe Western. It's hard to say. Central Michigan's been kind of a surprise this year. I really didn't expect them to be 0-2 at this point. They played Oklahoma State. It's tough for a little bit, but then they kind of the wheels came off the track there, and then losing this last week to South Alabama, getting kind of blown out was
and that was the one that I was a little bit more surprised about. The Oklahoma State one wasn't that surprised. I think sometimes a MAC team will catch a school off guard the first time around. Second time around, not so much. So I think I'm less surprised about the Oklahoma State outcome. I am surprised about the South Alabama outcome.
Yeah.
South Alabama, a quality FBS Group of 5 program, nothing against them and what they continue to do. They're doing great stuff. I believe they're in the Sun Belt. In the Sun Belt, again, banner weekend for them. Two of their teams knocked off top 10 teams.
Yeah.
And are still not ranked. I have issues with that. The AP bias is unbelievable.
Mm-hmm.
But so I think you're right. I think the MAC as a whole is fine. I think that some schools need to allocate and figure out resources, but
Sure.
I think you're right. I think schools in general are
Right.
pretty fine.
And you look at the history of it, there's great athletes coming through. There's NFL talent flooding rosters right now from the Mid-American Conference, future Hall of Famers in there currently, and just having just retired, like Ben Roethlisberger and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think
and
there's 65 guys on NFL rosters right now.
Yeah, so it's not like these guys are slacking or anything. They're starting and putting good numbers up. A couple of years ago, you had Buffalo on top of the world. You had Khalil Mack. They took Ohio State to the wire. Then a couple of years ago, Buffalo with Kyle Van Treese, who's now at Georgia Southern, who played great the other night against Nebraska. But he's down there, and they had Jarrett Patterson, who was running all over the country. I mean, he put Buffalo on the map that year, and then it kind of fizzled out at the end of the year. I think he was injured. He was injured in the MAC championships. We didn't get to see him play very much. So the MAC kind of just goes in. It's a roller coaster. It has its ups and it has its downs. But there's always going to be 1 or 2 schools that are pretty consistent. Kent State right now, it's hard to judge them because of their non-conference schedule. I think once they get in the conference, they'll be fine. They just have a gauntlet right now.
Yeah.
But KSU go make that money, like they are. And so, I think the conference as a whole will be fine. Like you talked about allocating resources. We went to the MAC basketball championship this year, and That was Kent State Akron on the men's side, Ball State Buffalo on the women's. And talk about the atmosphere of both of those games.
Yeah.
Both of those programs have kind of really grown. I mean, Akron and Kent State have always been relatively good in basketball. I mean, they're always, either they're not in the dance, they're knocking on the door of the dance. And so, I think they're allocating funds and resources to the right places. It's just, I don't know if it's recruiting, because recruiting's harder to get. And I don't know if the NIL has changed how, where these kids go. Because you see a lot of it too. These kids will commit to Power 5 schools and then they transfer to a MAC after a year or two.
Mhm.
It's pretty common. I mean, it happens yearly. There's the wide receiver from Ball State's a Vanderbilt transfer.
Yeah.
And so I think the transfer portal has really helped helped the MAC. We've talked to coaches about it before. Coach Luster when we had him on a couple months ago, he explained how that works. And I think it's going to be a huge benefit for the MAC. But the one thing that may hurt is NIL, because you're not getting those $1 million deals like the Power 5 kids are. But nevertheless, it's heading in a good direction.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's definitely something to kind of keep an eye on. Obviously, with NIL, with the transfer portal, we're not really seeing the full effects of it yet. And we probably won't for a couple of years, just until regulations kind of kick in and start to set in place. But yeah, I mean, it's fun to watch, fun to speculate. Last couple here from John S. or at NIU Huskies 2021. The quality of the ESPN stream was horrible for NIU at Tulsa. What are the chances the MAC drops its contract with ESPN at the conclusion and goes with something like Apple TV, Amazon, or Peacock for all Saturday games again? Well,
we didn't get to watch that. But I don't think they'll be leaving ESPN anytime soon. I think it was Commissioner Steinbrecher talking about it at Media Day in his State of the Conference, and they're going to be with ESPN for a while.
Going to be with ESPN for a while, and financially it makes sense. It sucks seeing those empty stadiums on Tuesdays and Wednesday nights in November. I think Friday night and Saturday games, that's the way to do it for the MAC, because you'd get more fans there.
Yeah.
Like, nobody wants to have their kids out on a school night in 30-degree weather.
Right.
Like, I'm sorry, it's not going to happen. I mean, I know I don't want to sit out there in 30-degree weather sometimes.
So we've been there and done that before.
We've done it. And I mean, you even look at the student section. The student sections are embarrassingly weak during those games as well, because, well, students are studying for finals. So I think it really hurts how the MAC is portrayed when you see an empty stadium. Mm-hmm. But I think you're right. The MAC is making way too much money off of the ESPN deal. Those ticket sales aren't doing anything for them in terms of that. They can afford to lose those ticket sales in order to gain the revenue from national viewage. So
right. And early on there's been conference games too on Saturdays on CBS. Now we're seeing them on the NFL Network. So they're gonna expand a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
But when it comes to those MACtion games in late October, November, it's going to be ESPN. You might get that CBS game here and there.
Mm-hmm.
It just happens with TV, with scheduling and whatnot. But I didn't get to see the quality of that game. I watched a little bit of the Toledo game. That was a good quality. I mean, I didn't have any problems with that.
I think that was hosted by BCSN.
Yeah.
So
and the Ball State game was hosted by ESPN, but the crew I was talking to some of the guys, they were all out of Indianapolis, so they were doing everything remotely.
Okay.
But from what I could see on the TV from the Ball State game and sitting in the press box, it all looked pretty good.
Yeah.
But yeah, and then the commissioners talked about it before, just ESPN, it's too good. It's just too good for that conference. And for a conference who kind of banks on having big contracts and having big non-conference games to help fund, essentially, because I mean, heck, you can go to Muncie, you can go to Toledo and get a general admission ticket for $15, if that. So they really depend on those TV contracts and those big Power 5 games to fund their seasons and fund other sports as well.
Right.
So yeah, I don't see them leaving ESPN unless something drastic happens.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, they'll be there for a while.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think, again, ESPN just making way too much money off of it, and I don't blame them. You don't want to lose that money,
No, especially now
and
with gambling being legal.
especially now with gambling starting to become legal, especially in Ohio. Next year it'll be really interesting
Yeah.
because after January 1st, Ohio is a sports gambling legal state,
Yep.
and that's literally half of your conference. You got 6 MAC teams here in the state of Ohio.
Mm-hmm.
So that's, I mean, there's something to be said for that. But yeah, so I mean that's gonna really about do it for our mailbag. Any thoughts, opinions, anything for this coming week that you're pumped for? Obviously, traveling to Miami or traveling to Cincinnati and then Ohio State. But any games on here that you have circled that aren't those 2 games?
I mentioned that Western game, a Western
Mhm.
Pitt. That's probably the one I'll keep my eye on the most.
Mhm.
'Cause, I mean,
I'm sure
that's
they'll have that on in the box at Ohio State too.
yeah, they definitely will. But yeah, that's going to be interesting because I think the 2 big ones that are interesting for me, and it's mainly because their coaches are friend of ours, and that's NIU and Vandy and Western and Pitt.
Yeah.
Those are going to be really fun games. I'm not sure which one, but one of those games has an opportunity to be really high scoring. If I had to guess, it'd probably be Vandy in Northern Illinois.
Yeah.
If one had to be high scoring, with the way I was really impressed with Western's defense this past week. They were able to shut down Ball State's run game, and they have a really good run game with Carson Steele
Mhm.
and whatnot. But I think that's going to be actually fairly low scoring. And being at Waldo, we've seen on social media Western's pulling out all the stops student wise, and so that should be really fun to watch.
Yeah, no, I'm excited to see that game. That's going to be fun. Vandy started the season 2-0, and this was a year that people thought Vandy might actually go winless. They shellacked Hawaii 63-10, and they came home to beat Elon 42-31. Lost to number 23 Wake Forest, who frankly handled them pretty good. I'm going to be real honest, 45-25. Northern Illinois on their schedule. They took on a pretty good Tulsa, lost to them by 3 at their place, and a good win at home against EIU. It's gonna be fun. I'm excited to see how that game goes. For me, the big game that I have circled, Eastern Michigan at Arizona State. Not because I think it's going to be a good game, but I want to see how Eastern Michigan and Coach Chris Creighton has the guys respond. They just lost a heartbreaker when they were up 14-0, and I think they even went into the half with like a 21-7 lead.
Something like that. Yeah.
And then the weather delay just killed all their momentum. I've seen it said online so many times, and I'm sure you can agree. You never want to be the team with the momentum when there's a weather stoppage.
No.
And that's exactly what it was. Eastern Michigan was enforcing their will and doing it pretty dominantly against Louisiana. And then all of a sudden, Louisiana just comes out after the weather delay and just absolutely punches Eastern Michigan in the mouth because Eastern lost that momentum. It's hard to get that back after a weather delay. So I'm excited to see how Eastern rebounds. And that's going to be a late one too, 11 o'clock Eastern time at Arizona State at Sun Devil Stadium. That should be a good one.
Yeah, it will be. Herm Edwards, his seat's getting a little warm out there too. So
a little bit.
Just a little bit. So yeah, we'll see. That'll be a fun one to watch, and that'll be one we can. I don't know if we'll get it on our phones, but we can listen to it at least on the radio on the way back.
Perfect. Well, AJ, anything else you wanted to throw out there for tonight?
I am set. We have a busy week. We have a lot of content coming out this weekend in particular.
Yeah.
We've we're gonna be grinding it out this week. So it's gonna be fun. I'm excited.
We posted our Tuesday top 3 already. If you guys haven't checked that out yet, you can go check that out on our Instagram, our Twitter account. We'll be posting another preview article. We're trying to do one a week, and typically not of a game that we're attending because we want to make sure that we give everybody a fair chance. And I haven't decided if I'm doing the Vanderbilt Northern Illinois game or the Pitt game or the Eastern at Arizona State game. So stay tuned for that. I'm excited to get that one to you guys. And then, of course, we have our Pick'em challenge. AJ, how are you feeling after the misses beat you in the Pick'em?
Yeah, that was a rough one. I mean,
Especially with the EKU pick.
that
So,
is something else. We had a little talk, put it that way.
well, that's good. I'm glad. The talk was that she needs to go and start sports gambling, right?
Exactly.
That's what it was. So cool. Well, AJ, thank you so much. I'm excited to go down to Columbus and Cincinnati with you this week. It'll be a good time. And thank you guys so much for tuning in. Keep following us on social media. We are really, really thankful for all 1,300 plus followers we have on our Twitter account now. Couldn't have made it this far without you guys. And so we really, really appreciate the love and support that you guys continue to show us. If you're new to the show, like I said, go follow us on Twitter at College Sport Pod. You can find us on Instagram at the CSC Podcast. We're posting stuff all the time, trying to add more stuff to our arsenal, add graphics, add visuals, add video. So if you have a suggestion, let us know. Shoot us a tweet, shoot us a DM, whatever. We want to continue to give you guys content that you guys look forward to. So cool.
Absolutely. We'll be pushing out a lot of content this weekend, so it'll be fun.
Absolutely. Well, thank you guys so much for tuning in. We really appreciate it. And we will see you from Cincinnati and from Columbus. See you next week.